incredible people around him, and he is going to continue to lean on a lot of those people. But at the end of the day, the American people voted overwhelmingly for President Donald J. Trump. They voted for his policies, his agenda, and for him to be the ultimate decision maker. And I think that everyone can rest assured in the American people's choice on that front, and that they've made the right one.
You said
John?
earlier today that we're continuing to bring in new people every day. Could you tell us who has come in this week?
We've made several personnel announcements. I'd refer you back to the press releases of nominations and personnel announcements that have gone out. I think there's been at least 3 that have gone out earlier this week.
In the White House?
I'd be happy to forward those to you if you're not receiving the White House press releases. John?
The European Union's being very shrewd in its threats of retaliation against these tariffs, saying that they would slap tariffs on things like bed linens, which would include the swing states of Florida, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Georgia, as manufacturers, chewing tobacco, which includes North Carolina, cranberries, the leading producer of which is Wisconsin, orange juice, again, Florida. Is the president concerned that he could hurt his political fortunes in some of these swing states if he goes ahead with these tariffs?
Look, the president has been talking about this for a long time. It shouldn't come as a surprise to anybody. Other countries have created unfair trade policies for decades that have harmed our national and economic security. The president wants a strong economy and a strong national security. And a strong U.S. economy benefits all Americans, particularly by helping us maintain a strong military and defend U.S. national security interests. And he's going to continue every day to fight for making sure that we have strong both national and economic security.
He was going to hit him where it hurts. Is he prepared to take the hit?
The president is prepared to protect our country. That is the number one priority he has as president, is to protect our economic and national security interests, and that's exactly what he's doing.
And if I could ask you just about Gary Cohn. He was a noted free trader or globalist. Will the president seek another globalist, another free trader?
I'm not going to get ahead of the president's announcement on who will replace Gary.
Follow up on Gary Cohn. The president has often touted the strength of the markets. There has been some volatility. Today, the U.S. markets opened down, so did the Asian markets. Is he concerned about the volatility in the markets in the wake of Gary Cohn's resignation announcement?
The president's focused on long-term economic goals. The economy is still infinitely stronger today than it was when the president took office. We're going to continue to fight for strong economic policy, job growth, wage growth, and certainly an increased number of people that are working in this country. Again, specifically some of the actions that you're going to see through the announcement later this week.
Isn't the message from the markets, though, that they're concerned about Gary Cohn's departure and what it might mean for the stability of this White House and the U.S. economy?
I think if you look at the overall message of the markets, it's that we're doing much better under President Trump than we were doing before he took
And the
office.
president called Gary Cohn a rare talent. Does that mean that he's open to having him come back in some other capacity, perhaps a cabinet level role?
Certainly they maintain a strong relationship and are going to continue that relationship, and certainly Gary will continue to be an advocate for the president in a number. I'm not closing the door. Steve.
One more quickly. Can you
I'm going to
confirm-
move around
can
just
you
because I want to make sure I get to as many of
Can you
your
just confirm
colleagues
or
as
comment on
possible.
the ABC
Stephen.
News report that a number of staffers have had their...
Chris, I'm going to bounce around, but I'm sure one of your colleagues would be happy to pick up where you've left off.
I do have a question about something you said earlier in response to Jeff's question. You said that there's arbitration that's already been won by whom and when?
By the president's personal attorneys, and for details on that, I would refer you to them.
But you're aware of them, so what more can you share with us?
I can share that that the arbitration was won in the president's favor, and I would refer you to the president's outside counsel on any details beyond that.
Follow-up, separate question. Tomorrow, the president will be meeting with video game executives. What does he hope to accomplish, and why is he bringing them in?
The president wants to continue the conversation on every different area that we can to help promote school safety. And I'm not going to get ahead of the discussion that they're going to have tomorrow, but we think it's an important discussion to have and one that the president looks forward to.
Does he think video games are too violent? Is that
I'm
why?
sorry?
Does he think that video games are too violent? Is that why he wants to bring them in?
It's certainly something that should be looked at and something that we want to have the conversation about.
Thanks very much. I was wondering, the president tweeted earlier about saying that the U.S. is acting swiftly on intellectual property theft. Should we understand that to mean that the 301 report is imminent? And can you kind of give us some detail about whether it might lean into tariffs or damages for intellectual property
Something
theft?
certainly that we have considered and talked about extensively, but I'm not going to get ahead of any potential announcement. Sarah?
Sarah, given the president's criticism of the attorney general in the past for referring matters to the IG, does he then concur with several of the GOP congressmen who are calling for a second special counsel to look into FISA abuse in the Department of Justice?
The president's made clear that he has significant concerns about the current FISA process. Nothing makes the problem of FISA more clear than both the Democrat and the Republican memos that outlined that the FBI used political campaign material to get a warrant to spy on American citizens. They failed to disclose to the judge that the dossier was funded by the Clinton campaign and the DNC, even as it was being used to spy on people associated with the Trump campaign. Obviously, those details alone show that the process needs to be looked at closely and reformed to make sure that we're doing everything we can to protect the privacy of Americans. Hallie?
Separate topic. I want to ask you about the VA, but I do want to follow up on something you have said twice now this week, which is when asked about that payment to the president, you've said that not that I'm aware of. Have you asked the president this question?
I'm sorry, can you be more specific?
Sure. It's both Jeff as well as Monday to the Wall Street Journal reporter. You were asked about whether the president knew about this payment his longtime lawyer made to facilitated rather Stormy Daniels. You said then and again today, not that you're aware of. Have you asked the president this question?
Yeah, I've had conversations with the president about this, and as I outlined earlier, that this case had already been won in arbitration, and that there was no knowledge of any payments from the president, and he's denied all of these allegations.
Sarah, but I just want to, is there a reason why you're not answering the actual substance of the question on the payment itself? Because it's come up a few times now. Can you explain
I
that?
believe I've addressed this question pretty extensively, and ongoing litigation, I'm not going to comment any further than I already have.
I don't ask for the VA I want to, which is
Sure.
the new IG report coming out. This is an issue that the president has been passionate about, veterans care. It finds that Secretary Shulkin was a part of failed leadership at the VA. So why is he still a part of this administration?
Look, Secretary Shulkin has done a great job, as I outlined on Tuesday, a number of the things that have been approved upon at the VA under his leadership. We're proud of the work that we've done, and we're going to continue to do everything we can to protect the veterans and help veterans in this country. It's something that the president talked about extensively on the campaign and has directed Director Shulkin to take a aggressive approach, and he's done that since becoming secretary. April.
Jordan.
Oh, sorry. You're
Jordan
right.
and
Jordan,
me.
I'm sorry.
All right, thanks, Sarah. I want to ask about
April, that was very
elephant
polite of
trophies.
I'm always polite.
Just to be clear, I didn't suggest otherwise, because I'm sure there will be some sort of terrible comment about how I was abusive to the press otherwise. Go ahead, Jordan.
Me in particular, but go ahead.
All right, thanks, Sarah. I wanted to ask you about elephant trophies. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service put out new guidance saying it would evaluate all permit requests on a case-by-case basis. This comes after the president had suspended the previous guidance, lifting the trophy ban. The president called that practice of collecting trophies a horror show. So I'm wondering, what does the president think of this latest policy of relaxing the ban, and did he sign off on it?
Look, the President Trump's position on trophy hunting remains the same. The Fish and Wildlife's announcement is a response to a court decision impacting how trophy import applications are reviewed. Anything further, I'd refer you to the Fish and Wildlife Service.
Does the president want them to further curtail that, given his thoughts about...
The president's been clear what his position is, and that has not changed. John, April, I'm sorry, I was a little scattered today on
You're
the
all right.
order. Go ahead.
All right, two topics really fast. This president was a businessman before he became a politician. And understanding business, if there's high turnover in a business, it's considered a management issue at the top. What's the issue here?
I don't believe there is one. I think that's why the first year of the administration has been so successful. As many people have outlined, we've actually accomplished a great deal of what the president campaigned on and set out to do, and we've only been here just over a year. So we certainly feel like there isn't an issue, but actually a great deal of success and a great story to tell about the president's first year.
Confidence in this administration with top people. I mean, you've had a lot of people, about 10 to 13 people in top-tier positions leave.
I think the confidence should be in the president and the policies that he's outlined and the agenda that he's laid out. That's what the American people voted for, and that's certainly what we've seen enacted over the first year and a half, and I think that's been a tremendous success.
Second issue, going back to Jeff. We heard a tape of the president with Billy Bush, And now we hear about Stormy Daniels, and you're saying that it's not true. What should the American public believe, and what does the president want the American public to believe after hearing that before the election, and now this?
Well, it's not to conflate two different things. The president's denied these allegations. We've addressed this. The American people were aware of this, voted for the president. I don't have anything more to add. John?
Thank you, Sarah. Two quick questions on two separate topics. Have any countries notified the administration of their intent to file complaints with the WTO regarding the imposition of these steel and aluminum tariffs?
I'm not aware of any specific complaints.
On the other question I wanted to ask you, Michael Cohen has indicated that he was not reimbursed in any way by the Trump organization or the Trump campaign for the $130,000 that he paid to Stormy Daniels. At the same time, he's being reimbursed for his legal fees by the Trump campaign. They've already paid $214,000 in legal fees to a firm that's representing Mr. Cohen. I don't want to get you in trouble with the Hatch Act, but do you happen to know why it is that the Trump campaign is paying his legal fees?
I don't. I can't speak on behalf of the campaign. I'd refer you to them. David?
You confirm this trip to California next week, and also why is it taking so long for the president to visit California?
I can confirm the president does plan to make a trip to California next week. Why it's taken so long? I think it's because he's been busy growing the economy, creating jobs, defeating ISIS, remaking the judiciary. I'd be happy to name off some other successes, but I think that's probably enough. But yes, I can confirm the president will be headed to California next week. We'll take one last question. Alex?
Sarah, bouncing off John's question on the Hatch Act, the White House's reasoning that Kellyanne Conway did not violate the Hatch Act when she said that a candidate in Alabama would be, quote, a vote against tax cuts, weak on crime, weak on borders, strong on raising your taxes. How do you see that as not advocating against a candidate?
She didn't advocate for or against the election of any particular candidate. She simply expressed the president's obvious position specific to policy, that he have people in the House and Senate who would support his agenda. I don't think it should be a secret to anybody that the president is going to want people both in the House and Senate that are going to help push forward policies that he supports and push forward policies and his agenda. In fact, Kellyanne's statement actually shows her intention and desire to comply with the Hatch Act, as she twice declined to respond to the host's specific invitation to encourage the people of Alabama to vote for that Republican. Thanks so much, guys. We'll see you tomorrow.
Are you saying that the allegation against the president has been true?
Okay, let's dig into some of what we just heard. Obviously, she made some news on the president's trade plan, the chaos, or as they maintain, lack thereof in the White House. But I want to begin with this Stormy Daniels, this porn star lawsuit. A lot of questions on that, and some statements made that we want to question. So Michael Smerconish, host of Smerconish here on CNN, and also a lawyer. Let me begin with you here, and let me just read from this lawsuit, because we heard this from Sarah Sanders, where she was saying, A, that the president has addressed this regularly. I don't think he ever has. Feel free, anyone, to correct me. But B, that the case has been won in arbitration. And when we heard arbitration, we all sort of started scratching our heads. Let me just read this for everyone so we're on the same page. From the Stormy Daniels lawsuit. To be clear, the attempts to intimidate Ms. Clifford into silence and shut her up in order to protect Mr. Trump continue unabated. For example, only days ago, on or about February 27, 2018, Mr. Trump's attorney, Mr. Cohen, surreptitiously initiated a bogus arbitration proceeding against Ms. Clifford in Los Angeles. Remarkably, he did so without even providing Ms. Clifford with notice of the proceeding and basic due process. Put simply, considerable steps have been taken by Mr. Cohen in the last week to silence Ms. Clifford through the use of an improper and procedurally defective arbitration proceeding hidden from public view. The extent of Mr. Trump's involvement in these efforts is presently unknown, but it strains credibility to conclude that Mr. Cohen is acting on his own accord without the express approval and knowledge of his client, Mr. Trump. So, Michael Smerconish, just starting with you, you have what Sarah Sanders said, and you have what I just read from this lawyer. What do you make of it?
So, I was paying close attention. When she said that, my ears perked up because I remembered reading in the complaint seeking a declaratory action that there was reference to arbitration. You've just read from paragraph 29. If you put it together, it sounds like there was some type of an arbitration that Stormy Daniels doesn't honor, doesn't believe was legitimate. Her lawyer is arguing she wasn't given notice, and it suggests to me that some type of a default judgment was entered against her for not having shown up to defend her position. But we really don't know, and she wouldn't answer any follow-up questions about it, but it definitely was the most intriguing aspect of that presser.
She said, just a couple of the questions were, did the president approve of the $130,000, which we know that Cohen apparently personally paid? The answer, not that I'm aware of, but it was clear that she had had conversations about that. And then this whole notion, Dana, just quickly over to you, the notion that the president has addressed this regularly.
No.
Has he ever addressed this?
Not that I can recall. In fact, as they were talking, Brooke, you and I and others here at CNN were sort of emailing around to make sure that we're not missing anything. I think one of our colleagues said that the last time the White House has officially acknowledged this was a couple weeks ago when Raj Shah was briefing. When I say acknowledged, even sort of answered questions about it. So that's a long way of saying no. He is not, as far as we know. It sure would be nice to be able to ask that question. I mean, going back to what you were just referring to with Michael, there's so many unanswered questions, not the least of which is, what outside counsel is she referring to? Is Sarah Sanders talking about Michael Cohen, the person who was engaged in this deal? Is she talking about another lawyer who is now being brought in to deal with the fact that Michael Cohen is caught up in this? We don't even know the answer to that, Brooke.
Okay, let's hit pause on this because we now have got a microphone on Jeff Zeleny who was asking all these great questions about precisely what we're discussing. Jeff Zeleny, what did you make of Sarah's response?
Well, Brooke, it's been clear this is something the White House has not wanted to talk about. Every time it has been asked, the White House says, we've made our feelings known about this. So I was asking Sarah Sanders specifically, beyond that, we know you've made your feelings known, did the president know specifically about that payment? And the White House has always maintained that this is an old story. There's nothing to see here. The voters have weighed in after all this happened. But the reality is we are learning more and more about this every day through our reporting, the reporting in the Wall Street Journal and elsewhere, specifically about that the payment that was made, which was not known during the campaign. That was something that was not known at all. So Sarah Sanders said today the president has addressed this. Well, in fact, the president did not address Stormy Daniels specifically and certainly did not address the payment that was made here. So I do believe that Sarah Sanders was opening the door to more information, and we actually have to look into this more about the arbitration. She said the president has won it specifically. Well, that is not clear by any means. In fact, that is the heart of the allegation here. If the president's lawyers were essentially trying to look like they won this. So I do not believe that they have resolved all of this. And a colleague of mine here, Hallie Jackson of NBC News, asked if Sarah Sanders had asked the president directly about this, because it's easy for a press secretary to say, I'm not aware. She said that she had asked him directly about this. Exactly. So now, of course, this is one of those things that the president ultimately will be asked himself at some point about this. Did he know about this? But before we get to that point, I do think, so many questions still need to be asked and answered about that payment specifically. Did the president authorize it? Michael Cohen is, we've been talking about, a longtime advisor. Hard to imagine that he did not ask his client about this at some point along the way. And this is not an old story that was happening, a year and a half or so ago. The allegations are that he is continuing to reach out as recently, as the last few weeks here. So this is something that I do not believe. There's a lot of stuff to discuss here at the White House, of course, with steel, aluminums, and tariffs, but also a matter of the president's credibility and honesty on this here. So we'll see where this goes from here, Brooke.
All of this dating back to 2007 and this whole golf tournament where they apparently met. But the point is the most important, which is the attempts to silence as recently as last week. Jeff Zeleny, thank you for asking the tough questions. Michael Smerconish, just back over to you. In addition to all of the above, there are also some serious questions about the Trump team possibly breaking campaign finance laws.
Here's the big picture as I see it. So this is a declaratory action that's been filed by Stormy Daniels. She is seeking to have that agreement, which ties her hands from speaking, declared null and void. And it really presents a conundrum for President Trump because, as I see it, he has three options. Number one, he can defend the underlying agreement and he can say it's valid. But then, Brooke, he owns it. And politically speaking, forget the legal argument, politically speaking, he's now saying, well, yes, all of that is true, and I've bargained to keep it all silent. That's option one. Option two is he ignores it. And she gets the declaratory relief that she's seeking, which then allows her to go and speak without the fear of $1 million penalty for every time she speaks in violation to the confidentiality. I think there's a third option. And the third option is one where he says, I didn't authorize that underlying agreement, but I nevertheless think it's valid. If he goes the third option route, he presents, I think, a problem for Michael Cohen, because then Michael Cohen will be said to have initiated a settlement on behalf of a client who wasn't in the loop and didn't have knowledge, and he would therefore potentially run afoul of the ethical guidelines in addition to the FEC requirement of having to disclose that $130,000 payment. I know it's all confusing, but it's really problematic, and it's very difficult to navigate.
And so he has a tough decision to make. What do you think, Dana? I mean, what of those three options, which would make all of this go away the quickest?
You know, I am actually going to leave that for Michael to answer with the degrees that I don't have. But I will answer with the sort of from the perch that I probably should answer, which is the political perch, which is, can we just take a step back here? Forget about, just for 1 second, the very important questions that Michael was talking about how this could be problematic legally for the president. We're talking about the fact that his personal longtime fixer / lawyer paid over $100,000 to a porn star for some reason having to do with the now president of the United States. But
this is totally consistent with everything else that we know about the president too.
But the question, right? But the question is, why? And we still don't know the answer to that. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Catherine.
Well, look, this was a few days before the election. I think in that sense, this might have been more politically sensitive at the time, particularly since it was around the time that the Access Hollywood tape dropped as well. But the idea that suddenly Trump's legions of supporters are going to abandon him because he had an affair with a porn star after he admitted on tape that he's able to grab women by the genitals, after he endorsed an accused child molester, after all of the other terrible things that Trump has publicly acknowledged doing, I just think that strains credibility as well. I think more than anything else, this is a legal problem for him and potentially a problem between him and his and other Republican elected officials. But the idea that hardcore Trump voters are going to abandon him over this, I mean, maybe they'll be happy for him for all we know that he had an affair with a porn star.
I completely agree, and that's not the point I was trying to make. The point I was trying to make is that we still don't know exactly why this major financial transaction took place.
Yes.
But we do know that Michael Cohen, as recently as what the Wall Street Journal was reporting in the last week, was complaining because he hadn't been paid back the $130,000. We do know that, according to the paper. We're going to hit pause. There's so much more I want to ask of all of you. MJ is also sitting next to me as well. We'll bring her in the conversation. Quick break. Back in a moment.
Explicit detail leaves no doubt Stormy Daniels, whose real name is Stephanie Clifford, says she had an affair with the president. Ms. Clifford began an intimate relationship with Mr. Trump in the summer of 2006 in Lake Tahoe, the lawsuit claims, and that in October 2016, Mr. Trump, with the assistance of his attorney, Mr. Cohen, aggressively sought to silence Ms. Clifford as part of an effort to avoid her telling the truth, thus helping to ensure he won the presidential election. In exchange, Trump's attorney, Michael Cohen, wired Daniels $130,000, and Clifford's new attorney, Michael Avenatti, told NBC's Today Show he has no doubt the president knew.
There's no question the president knew about it at the time. The idea that an attorney would go off on his own without his client's knowledge and engage in this type of negotiation and enter into this type of agreement, quite honestly, I think is ludicrous.
But the real damning information, if true, is what happened little more than a week ago. The president's attorney tried yet again to silence Clifford. On or about February 27, 2018, Mr. Trump's attorney, Mr. Cohen, surreptitiously initiated a bogus arbitration proceeding against Ms. Clifford in Los Angeles, the lawsuit says, in an attempt to intimidate Ms. Clifford into silence and shut her up. Clifford's lawyer included this so-called hush agreement in the lawsuit, saying it was written by Michael Cohen. It refers to Donald Trump under an alias, David Dennison, and Clifford under the name Peggy Peterson. According to the hush agreement, Stephanie Clifford came into possession of certain confidential information pertaining to DD, Trump's alias, which includes information, certain still images, and/or text messages. Michael Cohen goes on to write, included in those are images Donald Trump previously presented to his counsel to exist, i.e., text messages between PP and DD. In other words, Trump told his personal attorney about communications he was having with a porn actress. The pressure being applied to Clifford could explain her recent bizarre talk show appearances.
Did you have a sexual relationship with Donald Trump?
Clifford is now eager to talk and explain why she claims she was coerced into signing a false statement that the affair didn't happen. According to the lawsuit, any breach of the contract would mean Clifford would be obligated to pay the sum of $1 million.
And Jake, the denial of from Trump comes through his attorney, Michael Cohen. He's denied the affair ever took place. Cohen himself claims he never consulted Trump about the non-disclosure agreement and the $130,000 payment to keep Stephanie Clifford's quiet. This lawsuit, Jake, challenges all of that.
All right, Drew Griffin, thank you so much. I want to bring in my panel. Jeffrey Toobin, let me start with you.
Yes, sir.
As a legal matter, does this lawsuit have any merit? And is there anything that President Trump or Michael Cohen may have done that would be against the law?
Well, let me answer the second part first. As far as I can see, there's nothing unlawful that went on here. I mean, this was a contract between people for the payment of money, in turn for silence. There's nothing illegal about that. The question is this a valid contract? And according to Daniel's lawyer, Trump never signed it. And if Trump never signed it under whatever name or under any name that was legally binding, then she's free to do whatever she wants. So, I mean, I think the threshold issue here is, was there a contract and did Donald Trump sign it? According to the copy that's attached to the lawsuit, his name is not on it, but there may be some other copy out there where he did sign.
You know, Stormy Daniels claims in her lawsuit, Amanda, that she was forced to sign the false statement when she told the Wall Street Journal, quote, rumors that I have received hush money from Donald Trump are completely false. Then page 5 of the lawsuit details another act of intimidation, according to her, from just last Tuesday, February 27th. The fact that this may still be going on up until February of 2018 certainly seems to change this whole idea like this happened in the distant past.
Yeah, if there's ongoing acts of intimidation, certainly that is worthy of an investigation. But the one thing that we do know that is not in question is that we have two firm instances of Trump's allies using the legal process to buy the silence of women in order to suppress information from voters before the election. And these are questions that get to the president's character and certainly were, big factors in this election given the Access Hollywood tapes. I mean, we're talking about Donald Trump covering up affairs he had, with an adult film actress, a former Playboy model. During the election, this was an active thing, and voters should have had access to that information because it does get to the president's character, not only in terms of him not being faithful to his wife, potentially damaging his children in the process, but these are things that open up a president to blackmail, extortion, corruption. The fact that voters didn't have access to this information is very, very worrisome.
Simone, the White House repeated today that since the case that the case has already been addressed, they didn't need to talk about it. The president's already talked about it. Since the Wall Street Journal dropped Wall Street Journal story breaking the story of Stormy Daniels dropped back in January of this year, we can only recall one other time that the White House talked about it at all. And take a listen.
There's no question the president knew about it at the time. We haven't disclosed all the facts and evidence that we're aware of in connection with this as it relates to the filing of the complaint, and there's many other additional facts and evidence that we have, and we think that's going to come to light.
No, that's not the soundbite I wanted. I wanted the soundbite number 3. It's Raj Shah, the White House deputy press secretary answering questions. Anyway, we're having some issue with that. But I guess one of the problems is, okay, here it is.
Is the president aware that his lawyer paid that kind of money to a porn star to buy her silence? Does he approve of that?
I haven't asked him about it, but that matter has been asked and answered in the past.
Not since he acknowledged this. Yeah. He acknowledged this last week. This is the first time we've had a chance to ask about it. So can you go back and we find out if the president approves of the fact?
Yeah, I haven't asked him about that.
Will you ask him about that?
I haven't asked him about it.
Or will you ask him about it, Rob?
I'll get back to you.
So, I mean, there's just this whole spray of lies about this. First of all, you heard Sarah Sanders today act as though the American people knew about this incident back in 2016 before President Trump got elected. No, they didn't. The story broke in January.
We certainly didn't know.
And then second of all, they keep saying, oh, we've addressed this, we've addressed this. They haven't addressed this.
They haven't addressed anything, and I think it's a sad tactic for the White House press secretary's office and their shop to use the fact that they have not directly asked the president about it to absolve themselves from answering questions. That is a tactic, and I think the American people should know that it is their duty to go and get these answers. That is why they are to stand in front of the podium. At this point, they're trying to avoid, I think the press office is trying to avoid actual lies by saying we haven't asked the president about it. I have not asked. Will you ask? I'll get back to you. Again, they are trying to avoid themselves being caught up in this web of lies that President Trump and, his personal lawyer, Michael Cohen, have helped weave together. So I think that's what's happening here. But we don't have the answers, Jay. We want the answers. I don't know who has the answers, but I'd like to find them.
Does this matter, Amanda? Does it matter that President Trump may have spent $130,000 as his lawyer, or his lawyer may have done that to buy the silence of a woman with whom he had an extramarital affair?
It should matter. I've heard some Republicans and conservative talkers say this stuff happens. Bill Clinton did it. Voters don't care. I care. I'll be the fussy conservative that actually believes in family values still. Donald Trump went through a very messy divorce with his first wife, Ivana. I can't imagine that didn't do some damage to his children. I mean, it was messy. It was out in the tabloids. Everybody can go look it up. And when I see this now, I think of Barron. He's old enough to read. And so, let's get out of the political world. Let's get out of the legal world. Does a man of character do something like this? And can you trust him with the power of the presidency, knowing that he would potentially wreck his family and hide it in court and pay off these women? No.
Everyone stick around. We have a lot more to talk about. It's not just how many people are leaving the White House these days. It's also why they're leaving the White House. That's next. Stay with. Following some rather colorful commentary to The New Yorker. Scaramucci's departure was followed soon after by Steve Bannon, the nationalist id of the president's campaign. Shortly thereafter, Sebastian Gorka, also ignominiously fired, said in his resignation letter obtained by the Federalist that, quote, forces that do not support the MAGA promise are for now ascendant within the White House. Kelly also showed the door to Omarosa Manigault Newman, who soon showed up on Celebrity Big Brother. And don't forget those pesky ethics questions that have also dodged some members of the administration. Health and Human Services Secretary Tom Price resigning after his use of private jets for government travel emerged. CDC Director Brenda Fitzgerald quitting after it was revealed she bought tobacco stock. Then, of course, there are the numerous allegations of racist, homophobic, or otherwise inappropriate comments made by those nominated or serving in their Trump administration roles, many of which were brought to light by CNN's K-File team, also leading to a slew of departure. This list of departures, which, by the way, is not even close to comprehensive, we still don't know who might be next voted off the island. H.R. McMaster, perhaps, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, who reportedly called the president a moron. Attorney General Jeff Sessions, who basically dared the president to fire him last week about the Russia probe. Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, also in hot water over the Russia probe, as is FBI Director Christopher Wray. Presidential son-in-law Jared Kushner, who's been under scrutiny for security and ethical concerns. And, of course, the chief of staff, the one allegedly bringing order to the White House, John Kelly. So, in context, as you pour out a cold one for your homie, Gary Cohn, your Comey, who almost left once before, by the way, after President Trump claimed there were very fine people marching alongside the Klansmen and Nazis in Charlottesville. While you pour out your cold one for Gary Cohn, keep in mind that what matters just as much as who is leaving is why they're leaving. We'll be right back.
If he did, and potentially if there was some corrupt intent to shape that testimony, it could be obstruction of justice.
Caitlin, you're our White House reporter. I'll read another line or two from the article. In one episode, the president told an aide that the White House counsel, Don McGahn, should issue a statement denying a New York Times article in January. The article said that Mr. McGahn told investigators that the president once asked him to fire the special counsel, Robert Mueller, and Mr. McGahn never released a statement, later had to remind the president that he had indeed asked Mr. McGahn to see if that Mr. Mueller was dismissed. The sources tell the New York Times.
So he's asking him to issue a statement denying something that actually happened. And I want to read the other episode that the New York Times is referring to here. It says, according to the New York Times, that the president asked his former chief of staff, Reince Priebus, how his interview with the special counsel's investigators went and whether they had been, quote, nice. And they're attributing it to two people familiar. And it just goes to show the president is very interested, even though they've been very dismissive and they believe that this investigation is wrapping up. He's clearly very interested in what these investigators and what the special counsel wants to know about him, to the fact where he's asking his former chief of staff what happened in that interview. And I don't even have a law degree, and I know that that is not something you're supposed to do.
Well, let me read the other line, and Jeffrey and David, Rebecca, I want you to weigh in. This is from the New York Times. Legal experts said Mr. Trump's contact with the men most likely did not rise to the level of witness tampering, but witnesses and lawyers who learned about the conversations viewed them as potentially a problem and shared them with Mr. Mueller.
Exactly. I mean, this is the kind of thing that you're never supposed to do in the course of a criminal investigation. You're never supposed to sort of ask witnesses about their testimony, help them prepare for their testimony. This is supposed to be left to the lawyers. It's not illegal if that's all you're doing, but it leads to embarrassment like stories like this.
And at a time when the president is already facing questions about and an investigation into a potential obstruction of justice by firing Comey, this is another piece of that potentially. Is he trying to obstruct or impact this ongoing investigation? And so this could actually be not just embarrassing, but potentially very serious.
Because remember, at the heart, at least one of the elements of the Mueller investigation is whether there was any obstruction of justice effort on the part of the president or others.
Right, I agree with Rebecca. I mean, to Jeffrey's point, it may not be illegal, but it could be a brick in the wall in terms of the special counsel trying to get an indictment related to obstruction of justice. It also points to the fact that, look, everybody who works in the White House, including the White House counsel, as far as I know, it takes an oath of office to the Constitution. You're at a minimum, hinting to someone that maybe their loyalty is not to the Constitution, but individually to the president.
Well, it also speaks to the larger fact that the president is ignoring the advice of his lawyers, clearly, because they would certainly advise him not to ask questions like this. And it also goes to as far as to him sitting down with the special counsel's investigators himself. We know that they've expressed some interest in that. There's been conversations about that. And though the president initially said he would certainly look forward to sitting down with him, his lawyers later backtracked and said a decision had not been made on that. But it certainly shows how the president thinks that he's steering this ship himself and not his lawyers.
You were going to say?
Well, I just think, as a prosecutor, one of the things you always ask a witness is, did you discuss your testimony with anyone? And you ask because you want to learn precisely the kind of thing that's in this story, whether that anyone, particularly someone who's your superior, is trying to steer you in a particular direction.
Maggie Haberman, who co-wrote this article in the New York Times, is joining us on the phone right now. So, Maggie, give us your sense. You've done a lot of reporting on this. What stands out as potentially inappropriate behavior by the president?
Look, we spoke to legal experts who said they do not believe that this would likely rise to the level of witness tampering, but it certainly cuts against best practices that the president has been advised of by his lawyers, which is, you don't discuss this kind of thing. You don't discuss appearances by witnesses or, how things went with investigators when it is an investigation that relates to you or to which I know the president has insisted he is not under investigation, but we know he is, and we know that obstruction of justice has been one of the issues that Robert Mueller's team is looking at. One instance which involved Reince Priebus was fairly minor and fairly quick in the sense that the president...
Go ahead.
Sorry, the president raised the issue of the appearance that Priebus had made before Mueller's investigators and asked if they were nice. And Priebus, according to our sources, so they were nice, professional. The president tried to ask again about, did they talk about, what I'm seeing in the news or something to that effect, and Priebus sort of declined to get into it. Just said, it's something to the effect of it's what you'd expect, and then directed the conversation elsewhere. John Kelly was present for that. It's not clear whether he tried to get the president to move off of it or not. The second incident with Don McGahn, the White House counsel, is more problematic. It came in response to a story that Mike Schmidt and I had published about the president seeking to dismiss Mueller last year via McGahn. The president had wanted McGahn to put out a statement saying that that had not happened. McGahn would not do that. McGahn had to remind the president that this is, what he had asked him to do last year, and our understanding is McGahn has told Mueller's investigators that. That one, I think, gets a little more detailed and is a little more significant.
It certainly sounds like that. Maggie, what does it tell you that the president seems to be ignoring the advice of his attorneys in raising these kinds of questions with witnesses?
Look, I think that we can't climb into his head, so I don't want to project too far out. Certainly it is unwise. We obviously know that the Russia investigation is very much top of mind for him. Whether he is actively trying to, sort of seek specific information or just get a sense, or if this is on his brain, at least in the previous incident, I think is one way to look at it. I think with McGahn, I think it gets into a different area, which is trying to get McGahn to deliver a statement that, according to what McGahn told Mueller's investigators, is contrary to the truth. And I think that's potentially much more problematic. But again, only the president knows what he knows. We don't know what he is aware of what may have taken place or what may not have taken place. So I don't want to speculate too much about what he is afraid of possibly taking place. Some of this is this is how he functions. This is how he operates. And when something is consuming him, he focuses on it extensively.
How do you think, Maggie, the recent high-profile departures from the White House are affecting the president in this area?
Look, I don't think that it relates to what he's asking people about Russia. I think that I do think that certainly among the people who are leaving, there are people who probably have been asked by him about issues, or could have been, who could have heard him talk about Russia. And for those who are facing interviews with Robert Mueller's office or who have had them already, every day remaining there is more legal exposure potentially that you just don't want. But I think the president has, always believed that he knows best, and he, has viewed lawyers' advice over the years as sort of a means to an end on business deals or a means to keeping yourself out of trouble in a civil suit. This is an entirely different order of magnitude that he is unused to.
These two incidents you report in the New York Times, Maggie, happened months ago. Any indication things have changed since then?
Not particularly, but we don't know any specifics. I don't think that the president changes who he is, and the McGahn incident was not that long ago. It was a couple of weeks ago.
What's the latest you're hearing, I wonder, about the possibility that if called by Robert Mueller to answer questions, the president will do so?
I believe that people on the president's team are very mindful that having the president submit to sort of an open-ended interview with Robert Mueller is a real problem, and something they are hoping to avoid. Whether they will throw down the gauntlet and force him to subpoena the president, remains to be seen. I think they want to be respectful of the process and continue that way as long as they can.
Maggie Haberman of the New York Times, great reporting. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, let's get an analysis from our panel. Jeffrey Toobin, what do you think?
Well, I think Maggie is exactly right that this is a violation of best practices at best, and seriously problematic, especially at worst, particularly the conversation with Don McGahn. Because if you were to sort of put the most sinister cast on it, you would say the president is telling his White House counsel to go out in public and lie about a matter that is under criminal investigation. That's potentially very serious. Now, Don McGahn apparently had the good sense to, not go out in public and not make a statement about this. But it does indicate that, the president has a somewhat freewheeling approach to truth on his own and may be on behalf of others as well.
Yeah, it's a significant moment. Go ahead, David.
The only thing I would add to that is that I think this is a perilous moment for the White House in terms of all the people that are now on the outside. I have no idea who Maggie's sources are. She's the best in the business. But when you have a situation with all these people, we've been talking about chaos all week, that know things that have happened recently in the White House that are now on the outside, this is additional exposure to them if they have been crossing the line or not been using best practices.
You know this is going to rattle the president coming from Maggie Haberman in his hometown newspaper.
Well, and it goes to show how consumed the president truly is by the Russia investigation, even though the White House argues that he's not. They believe it's wrapping up. It is definitely something that contributes to his increasingly isolated, angry, volatile mood that he's had in the White House. We've continued to see him go after the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions. Just last week was complaining after Jeff Sessions went to dinner with the Deputy Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein, who the president famously dislikes. So it truly shows what the president is so angry about, why he's so angry with Jeff Sessions, who recused himself from overseeing this Russia investigation. And the president wanted Jeff Sessions to be in that position to be able to protect him from things like this. And it shows his increasing attention and focus on this investigation.
He's at a private dinner, by the way, right now, Rebecca, here in Washington, in Georgetown, a home of a supporter, C. Boyden Gray, a former White House counsel for President George H.W. Bush, and other supporters of the president are there. He doesn't do that very often, leave the White House and head to a private dinner that's not at his hotel here in Washington.
Right, it is unusual. Also, Caitlin's reporting showed that the president of America First Policies, an outside group that supports the president, will be there. So you can expect a very robust political conversation to go on this evening. But with this cloud hanging over the president's head, all of the staff-related chaos we've seen, the Stormy Daniels issues, and of course the Russia investigation, the president, you would imagine, would be a little bit distracted by those things happening.
Lots going on, and we're going to continue to follow it here on CNN. Important programming note to our viewers. The attorney for Stormy Daniels will be a guest on Anderson Cooper 360 later tonight, 8 p.m. Eastern, an hour from now. That's it for me. Thanks very much for watching. Erin Burnett Out Front starts right now.
Yep. Out front next, breaking news, the White House trying to contain the fallout from Stormy Daniels' bombshell tonight, claims Trump's attorney further threatened Daniels. What did the president know and when about the money? Plus, breaking news in the Russia investigation. The special counsel now aware of 2 conversations the president of the United States has had with key witnesses in the investigation after they testified to Mueller. This is according to the New York Times. We have breaking details on what he wanted to know. And the mysterious poisoning of a Russian spy and his daughter, police confirming it was a nerve agent. Is Russia sending a message to the United States? Let's go out front. And good evening, I'm Erin Burnett. Out front tonight, the breaking news. Someone is not telling the truth. And it's either the President of the United States, Donald Trump, or porn star Stormy Daniels. Team Trump facing a barrage of questions after Stormy Daniels sued the president, claiming that a $130,000 settlement, which was paid to her for her to keep quiet about her alleged sexual relationship with Trump, was no longer valid because Trump actually never signed the agreement. Just moments ago, Daniels' attorney telling CNN that the president's personal attorney, Michael Cohen, has, quote, further threatened Daniels to keep silent with a restraining order. And earlier, the White House press secretary, Sarah Sanders, was asked again and again about Daniels.
Did the president approve of the payment that was made in October of 2016 by his longtime lawyer and advisor, Michael Cohen?
Look, the president has addressed these directly and made very well clear that none of these allegations are true. This case has already been won in arbitration, and anything beyond that, I would refer you to the president's outside counsel.
You said that there's arbitration that's already been won? By whom and when?
By the president's personal attorneys, and for details on that, I would refer you to them.
But you're aware of them, so what more can you share with us?
I can share that that the arbitration was won in the president's favor, and I would refer you to the president's outside counsel on any details beyond that.
Daniels' attorney mocking Sanders' claim that the president won the arbitration as a lie, telling a columnist for the New York Times, quote, yeah, and he also won the popular vote. So when Sarah Sanders said Trump won the arbitration, I guess this is the confusing thing. If you're admitting there was arbitration, then what else are you admitting? Are you also admitting that Donald Trump knew that the hush money paid to Daniels was paid to ensure her silence? When pressed further, Sanders stonewalled.
Did he know about that payment
Yeah.
at the time, though?
I've addressed this as far as I can go.
But that payment, did he know about the payment at the time?
Not that I'm aware of. There was no knowledge of any payments from the president, and he's denied all of these allegations. I believe I've addressed this question pretty extensively.
First of all, she's saying not that I'm aware of. She's given herself some distance from it. And as for this point she made about this has all been answered in the past, here's the thing about this. If you want to find out what Team Trump has said about Daniels, you got to go way far back into ancient dinosaur history in this Trump administration. In fact, you have to go back to November 4th, 2016, 4 days before the election. At the time, Hope Hicks, then the campaign spokeswoman, denied a relationship between Daniels and Trump. But that's it. That's as far as Team Trump has ever gone to address this alleged relationship. And obviously, they have never fully addressed the non-disclosure agreement or, and this could be the most crucial part when it comes to breaking the law on elections, $130,000 in alleged hush money. Today, Sanders repeatedly directed all further questions about the scandal involving Stormy Daniels to the outside counsel.
Anything beyond that, I would refer you to the president's outside counsel. Anything beyond that, I would refer you to outside counsel. I would refer you to the president's outside counsel. And I would refer you to the president's outside counsel on any details beyond that. I can't speak on behalf of the campaign. I'd refer you to them.
Here's the thing. If the president of the United States, Donald J. Trump, tried to influence the election by paying hush money to a porn star so she would be quiet and not throw another horrible allegation about women on him 4 days before the election, that is as important as it gets, and the American people deserve answers. It's time for the White House to stop trying to punt it to some outside counsel. Jeff Zeleny is out front. And Jeff, there are so many more questions, and you had again and again pushing Sarah Sanders today on these crucial questions. What is the reaction tonight from inside the White House?
Well, Aaron, it's clear the White House has wanted to conflate this whole idea as an asked and answered situation long before the election, sort of blending this in with all the accusations of, affairs and alleged sexual abuse that the president obviously went through. And that was asked and answered by voters. This is brand new information. So we asked this question again today because the White House has refused to answer it. They have said the president has addressed this. Our view is clear on this. Well, the reality is the view isn't clear. And in answering or trying to answer the questions today, Sarah Sanders actually opened the door to more questions about the arbitration. Specifically, she said repeatedly the arbitration has been won. We learned after the briefing that is not true, at least in the view of Stormy Daniels and her lawyers. So by trying to push this aside, we learned several things today. One, it's been discussed in the West Wing here. The press secretary said she has had a conversation with the president, at least one, about this specifically. We also know that this is something that is worrisome enough to the president's political organization to have Michael Cohen still on the case on this here. So I think we end this day here, Aaron, with so many more questions about the Stormy Daniels situation. She's not backing down, and the White House still has more questions to answer. We'll see if they do tomorrow or in the coming days. But of course, the president at some point, Aaron, I would assume, will be asked this because he, of course, knows if he was involved or knew about this payment in October 2016 more than anyone else. Aaron?
Right. And of course, there's been so much reporting done on that. It just does beg the obvious question for a regular person, which is why would you pay somebody off and why would you sign a non-disclosure agreement if you didn't do anything and you had nothing that you didn't want disclosed? All right, let's take a closer look at what Stormy Daniels is claiming in her lawsuit. Sarah Seidner is out front.
Did she have a sexual relationship with the president?
Yes.
Stormy Daniels' attorney says Donald Trump knew about the alleged hush agreement and the $130,000 in alleged hush money paid to shut her up.
There's no question the president knew about it at the time. The idea that an attorney would go off on his own without his client's knowledge and engage in this type of negotiation and enter into this type of agreement, quite honestly, I think is ludicrous.
The lawsuit filed against Donald Trump and a company linked to Trump's attorney Michael Cohen argues that the agreement is null and void because it was not signed by Donald Trump. Daniels' lawyer says Mr. Trump purposely did not sign the agreement so he could later, if need be, publicly disavow any knowledge of the contract and Daniels.
She believes it's important that the public learn the truth about what happened.
The non-disparagement agreement, which refers to Trump as David Dennison and Daniels as Peggy Peterson, was signed 11 days before the 2016 presidential election by Michael Cohen and Stephanie Clifford, Daniels' legal name. Just last month, Cohen admitted to paying Daniels $130,000 from his personal funds, but insisted that, quote, neither the Trump organization nor the Trump campaign was a party to the transaction with Ms. Clifford, and neither reimbursed me for the payment, either directly or indirectly. The adult film star wanted to share her story in 2016 after this Access Hollywood tape surfaced.
I just start kissing them. It's like a magnet. You just kiss. I don't even know way. And when you're a star, they let you do it. You can do anything.
But the lawsuit said Trump and the campaign got wind of Stormy's plan to reach out to the media and wanted to shut her up. The lawsuit says Cohen has continued to intimidate Ms. Clifford into silence and shut her up in order to protect Mr. Trump, even as recently as February 27th, when Cohen filed a bogus arbitration proceeding against Daniels. But Donald Trump's attorney Cohen said this about that arbitration. The designated judge from the arbitration tribunal found that Ms. Clifford had violated the agreement and enjoined her from, among other things, filing this lawsuit. Now, Stormy Daniels' attorney has responded to what Sarah Sanders said at the White House, saying that Trump won this arbitration. He says, look, we have had no notice, there has been no hearing, no opportunity given to Stormy to respond, and no decision on the merits. And it is completely bogus. I do want to mention this to you, Aaron. We looked through this non-disclosure agreement, and basically inside of it, it says that if the agreement is violated, that for each violation, she could have to pay up to $1 million in penalties, plus pay back the $130,000. Now all this information is out there. Everybody's wondering what that means and what happens next. Aaron?
All right. Thank you very much, Sarah. And I want to go straight now to Wendy Murphy, former prosecutor, author of Justice for Some, former prosecutor and CNN legal analyst Paul Callan, and White House correspondent for American Urban Radio Network's April Ryan. All right, Paul, when you put all this together, you have this back and forth, you have a non-disclosure agreement, and you have a payment, and a regular person saying, why would you have those things if there was absolutely nothing that occurred? The payment, of course, could be a major violation of federal election law. That's why this is important, even if you don't care about the president's character. What's the bottom line?
Well, the bottom line is that this is the kind of thing that would be fatal to any presidential candidacy. I mean, a president of the United States paying off a porn star in order to get elected, $130,000. I mean, that's really, that would normally be an enormous story. But the president, of course, has said, number one, I didn't know anything about this. He didn't know that his own lawyer paid a porn star $130,000. Boy, that's some lawyer. Remember, Michael Cohen, the lawyer, says he paid it out of his own money. You ever meet a lawyer who reached into his pocket for $130,000 to help out a client? I don't think so. And they have now, instead of, if it's a false story, why don't we cross-examine? Why don't we cross-examine Stormy Daniels? Let's go public with it. Let a little sunshine in. Instead, they go to an arbitrator who issues an order barring her from saying anything ever going into the future. So if you want to cast a little light on this, why don't we hear everybody's story?
Right, which, Wendy, of course, raises the whole question here. You've got this whole arbitration thing. Now you've got this restraining order, which I guess is restraining from saying anything, because it's not as if she's trying to bang down the door of the White House. Just to be clear to people, we're talking about a restraining order for silence. But Wendy, I mean, you know, you have this whole non-disclosure agreement that apparently was signed by Peggy Peterson, and then David Dennison was the other party. David Dennison, Donald Trump, never actually signed.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting question that a lot of people disagree about, but I think that it's probably okay for the president not to have actually signed the document and for it still to be enforceable. However, he would have to have given the power of attorney to his attorney to do that, and that has to be done with his knowledge and consent and intent. And remember, Cohen keeps saying he knew nothing, so that would be at a minimum unethical, and Cohen could lose his license if that's in fact what happened. But look, it was done to give the president plausible deniability, but from where I sit, I'd call it implausible deniability. There's no way he didn't know, not only because of the amount of money, but because of the severity of the issue in terms of its relationship to the campaign. And on the campaign finance issue, can I just say that it's not plausible that this was not done to benefit the campaign and that people in the campaign were not aware of it. It just would make everybody involved committing some level of malpractice, campaign malpractice, legal malpractice, for the people not to know. And so $130,000 for silence connected to the obvious purpose of not hurting the campaign on the virtual eve of the election, that's a serious campaign finance problem because it's way beyond the amount that can be given legally. And from what I know, it wasn't reported, which is also campaign finance requirement. So many layers of problems here.
It wasn't reported because it was out of the goodness of Michael Cohen's heart. Yes, I say that because I personally think that doesn't add up at all. I think I don't know anyone who would think that adds up. Also, of course, there's a report out there that maybe he was complaining, why wasn't he being paid back? I don't know. Look, all you know right now is he said he knew nothing about it. April, Sarah Sanders tried to tap dance around answering questions around the story, right? We played some of those exchanges. You've experienced this being in that press room. Trump himself has been silent on this entire issue, which is very interesting because when it comes, for example, to women who have accused him of sexual assault, which he admitted to doing on that infamous grab him by the pee video, he's happy to speak out. Here he is.
These vicious claims about me of inappropriate conduct with women are totally and absolutely false. It's a phony deal. I have no idea who these women are. Have no idea.
The events never happened. Never. All of these liars will be sued after the election is over.
All right, just to stay